The air in my daughter's house was thick with the scent of instant coffee and unvoiced resentment. I sat on the edge of their sagging couch, my hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to make myself as small as possible. At 70, I'd learned how to shrink not just my presence, but my expectations, my voice, my needs. The living room was a chaos of toys, half-empty mugs, and the low hum of a television nobody was watching. My daughter, Emily, moved through the space with the brisk efficiency of a woman stretched too thin, her shoulders tight, her smile rarer than it used to be. "Mom, you're sure you're okay on the couch?" she asked, not meeting my eyes as she scooped up a pile of laundry. Her voice carried that polite edge, the kind that made questions sound like accusations. I nodded, my lips pressed into a thin line. The couch was lumpy, its springs creaking under my slight frame. But I'd slept in worse places during my life. I wasn't about to complain not when I was a guest in a home that didn't feel like mine. It hadn't always been like this. I'd raised Emily in a house filled with laughter, where the smell of fresh bread and the sound of her piano lessons floated through the air. Back then, I was Margaret, the mother who could fix anything scraped knees, broken toys, even her teenage heartaches. But time has a way of unraveling things. After my husband, Tom, passed 5 years ago, the world seemed to shrink around me. The house we'd shared for 40 years was sold to cover medical bills, and my savings dwindled faster than I'd expected. When Emily offered, or rather, insisted I move in with her family, I thought it was a new beginning. Instead, it felt like an exile. Her husband, Greg, was less subtle about his feelings. He'd come home from his job at the car dealership, his tie loosened, his face a map of exhaustion. "Margaret, you left dishes in the sink again," he'd say, his tone clipped, as if I were a tenant who'd overstayed her welcome. I'd apologize, scrub the plates until they gleamed, and retreat to the couch, my makeshift bed in their overcrowded home. Their 2 kids, Lily and Max, were the only bright spots, 7 and 9, with eyes that still saw me as grandma, not a burden. But even their affection couldn't erase the truth. I was an intruder in their world. The decision to move in had been practical, or so Emily had framed it. My small apartment had become too expensive, and my social security checks barely covered the basics. "We've got the space," she'd said, though the 3-bedroom house already felt like it was bursting at the seams. What she didn't say, what hung in the air like damp laundry, was that they needed my help too. Greg's commissions were inconsistent, and Emily's part-time job at the library didn't stretch far. I'd offered to chip in what I could, grocery money, a share of the utilities, but it never seemed enough to shift the balance of their resentment. One evening, as I folded a blanket over the couch, Greg's voice carried from the kitchen. "She's not even paying rent. We can't keep doing this." My heart sank, but I kept my hands busy, pretending I hadn't heard. Emily's response was softer, muffled, but I caught the words temporary and no choice. Temporary. The word stung more than I expected. I'd spent my life building a family, only to find myself a footnote in theirs. That night, I lay awake on the couch, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. The darkness pressed against me, heavy with memories of better days, soft Tom's laughter, of Emily's small hand in mine, of a life where I'd felt needed. But something else stirred in me too, a flicker of defiance I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just Margaret, the old woman on the couch. I was Margaret, who'd balanced budgets through recessions, who'd nursed Tom through his illness, who'd always found a way. I didn't know how yet, but I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. The next morning, I woke early, before the chaos of the household began. I made coffee, tidied the living room, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad I'd found in a drawer. My pension was meager, but I'd been frugal all my life, squirreling away small sums in a savings account Emily didn't know about. It wasn't much $20,000, scraped together over decade, but it was mine. I started jotting down numbers, ideas, possibilities. The bank's name kept surfacing in my mind, a place I hadn't visited in years. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to act. By the time Emily shuffled into the kitchen, her hair a mess and her eyes bleary, I'd hidden the notepad. "Morning, Mom," she said, pouring coffee. "You're up early." "Just couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice steady. She didn't ask more, and I didn't offer. But as I sipped my coffee, I felt the first stirrings of a plan, a quiet, impossible plan that might just change everything. The bank smelled of polished wood and faint perfume, a stark contrast to the cluttered chaos of Emily's house. I sat across from a young loan officer named Sarah, her smile professional but warm. My hands trembled slightly as I handed her my ID, the weight of my decision pressing against my chest. I hadn't told Emily or Greg I was here. This was mine alone, a secret I cradled like a fragile bird. "I'd like to know about mortgages," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Specifically, how they work if someone wants to take one over." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her pen pausing over her notepad. "You mean assuming an existing mortgage or purchasing one outright?" she asked. I nodded, unsure of the terminology but certain of my intent. I'd overheard Greg complaining about their mortgage payments, how they were always late, how the bank was breathing down their necks. It was a long shot, but my savings were burning a hole in my pocket, and I needed to know if they could be a lifeline, not just for me, but for them. She explained the process. Mortgages could sometimes be bought or paid off, depending on the lender's policies and the homeowner's situation. Emily and Greg's house, I knew, was underwater, worth less than they owed, a fact Greg muttered about often. My $20,000 wasn't enough to pay it off outright, but Sarah mentioned something called a short sale or negotiating with the bank. My mind spun with terms I barely understood: liens, escrow, equity, but I clung to her words like a drowning woman to a rope. "Do you know the specifics of the mortgage you're interested in?" Sarah asked. I didn't. I only knew the name of their lender, gleaned from a late-night glimpse at a past due notice on the kitchen counter. I felt foolish, an old woman playing at something she didn't fully grasp. But I pressed on. "Could I find out without the homeowners knowing?" I asked, my voice low. Sarah's smile softened, and she leaned forward. "It's tricky, but possible," she said. "If you have certain details, we can look into public records or contact the lender discreetly. What's your goal here?" I hesitated. My goal? To stop being a burden, to give Emily and Greg breathing room, to reclaim a sliver of dignity in a house that felt like a cage. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "I want to help my family." Quietly. Sarah nodded, her eyes kind but curious. She gave me a list of documents to gather, things like the property address, the lender's name, and any details about the loan. I left the bank with a folder of papers and a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since moving onto that couch, I felt like I was moving toward something. Back at the house, I kept my secret tucked away, my notepad hidden under a stack of old magazines. Emily was at work, and Greg was out with the kids, leaving me alone with the hum of the refrigerator and my thoughts. I started making calls, using the old landline in the corner of the living room. The lender's customer service was a maze of automated menus, but I was patient. Years of raising a family had taught me how to wait, how to persist. By the end of the day, I'd confirmed the lender's name and learned the mortgage was indeed in arrears 3 months behind, with threats of foreclosure looming. That evening, as I helped Lily with her homework, her small hand scribbling math problems, I felt a pang of guilt. Was I betraying Emily by going behind her back? But then I overheard Greg on the phone, his voice sharp with stress, arguing with someone about payments. "We're trying." "Okay," he snapped before hanging up. The guilt faded, replaced by resolve. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for them, for the family I'd raised, for the daughter I still loved, even if she couldn't see me anymore. The next day, I returned to the bank, armed with the property address and lender details. Sarah was there again, her smile a little less formal this time. "You've been busy," she said, scanning my notes. She explained that my savings could be a down payment toward negotiating with the lender, possibly reducing the principal or settling the arrears. It wasn't a full solution, but it was a start. "You need to act fast," she warned. "Foreclosure processes move quickly once they start." I nodded, my heart racing. I didn't have much, but I had enough to make a difference. I signed papers authorizing Sarah to contact the lender on my behalf, keeping my name out of it for now. As I left, the weight of the couch seemed lighter, like a burden I might soon shed. I didn't know if I could pull this off, but for the first time in years, I felt like Margaret again, not the old woman on the couch, but the woman who'd always found a way. The days blurred into a routine of secrecy and small victories. I'd slip out of the house when Emily and Greg were at work, claiming I was going for a walk or to the library. Instead, I'd head to the bank or the local coffee shop, where I could use their Wi-Fi to research mortgages and foreclosure laws. My notepad grew thick with scribbled terms amortization, lien priority, debt-to-income ratios, words that felt foreign but empowering. Each new piece of knowledge was a brick in the foundation I was building, a way to rewrite my place in this family. Sarah became my ally, her patience unwavering as she guided me through the process. The lender had agreed to discuss options, but they needed proof of funds and a formal proposal. My $20,000 was a drop in the bucket compared to the $150,000 still owed on the house. But Sarah suggested a bold move: use my savings to catch up the arrears and negotiate a loan modification. It wouldn't erase the mortgage, but it could stop the foreclosure and give Emily and Greg a chance to stabilize. "You're sure you want to do this anonymously?" Sarah asked during one of our meetings. Her pen hovered over a form, her eyes searching mine. "They'll know someone stepped in eventually. Let them know when it's done," I said. "I don't want them to feel obligated." The truth was, I didn't want their pity or their gratitude. I wanted their respect, something I hadn't felt since I'd become the woman on the couch. At home, the tension was palpable. Greg's temper flared more often, snapping at the kids over small things as spilled juice, a forgotten toy. Emily's silence was worse, her eyes avoiding mine as if my presence were a reminder of their struggles. I kept my head down, helping where I could, cooking dinner, folding laundry, reading bedtime stories to Lily and Max. But every night, as I lay on that creaking couch, I thought about the bank, the papers, the plan. It was my lifeline, my rebellion against being invisible. One afternoon, I found a foreclosure notice stuffed in a pile of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. The bold red letters screamed urgency, final notice of intent to foreclose. My heart sank, but it also steeled my resolve. I called Sarah immediately, my voice trembling as I read her the details. "We're running out of time," I said. "I'll push the lender," she promised. "But we need your funds in escrow by next week. Can you do that?" I swallowed hard. My savings were all I had, The last piece of my independence. Handing it over felt like stepping off a cliff. But I nodded into the phone. I'll make it happen. That evening, I sat with Lily and Max, helping them build a fort out of couch cushions. Their laughter was a balm, a reminder of why I was doing this. Grandma, you're the best, Max said, his gap-toothed grin wide as he draped a blanket over the fort. I smiled, but my mind was elsewhere, calculating risks and rewards. If this worked, they'd have a home. If it didn't, I'd have nothing left. The next morning, I transferred my savings to the escrow account Sarah had set up. It was done in minutes. A few clicks on a computer at the bank, but it felt like signing away a piece of my soul. I walked home slowly, the autumn air sharp against my skin. The house was quiet when I arrived. The kids at school, Emily and Greg at work. I sat on the couch, my hands empty, and let the weight of what I'd done settle over me. Sarah called 2 days later with news. The lender had accepted the payment to cover the arrears. They were open to a loan modification, reducing the monthly payments to something Emily and Greg could manage. It wasn't a full purchase of the mortgage that was beyond my means, but it was enough to keep the house safe for now. You did it, Margaret, Sarah said, her voice warm. They'll get a letter soon, but it won't mention you. I thanked her, my throat tight. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of pride. I'd done something real, something that mattered. But the secrecy gnawed at me. How long could I keep this hidden? And what would happen when they found out? That night, as I folded my blanket on the couch, Emily came into the living room, her face pale. Mom, did you see the mail? She asked, holding the foreclosure notice. Her voice was small, fragile, like the girl I'd raised. I saw it. I said carefully. It'll be okay, Emily. Things have a way of working out. She looked at me, her eyes searching, but she didn't press. Instead, she nodded and turned away, leaving me alone with the couch and my secret. I lay down, the springs creaking beneath me, and closed my eyes. The plan was in motion, but the hardest part was still to come. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped into the pile of bills and junk mail like a bomb waiting to detonate. I saw it first, the crisp envelope from the lender, and my heart skipped. I tucked it under a magazine before Emily or Greg could notice, my hands shaking as I busied myself with dishes. The house was quiet, the kids at school, and I needed to see what it said before anyone else did. In the privacy of the bathroom, I opened the letter, my eyes scanning the formal language. We are pleased to inform you that the delinquent balance on your mortgage has been resolved. A modified payment plan has been approved. My breath caught. It had worked. The arrears were cleared. The foreclosure threat lifted. And the new monthly payments were lower manageable, even for Emily and Greg's strained budget. My $20,000 had bought them time, maybe even a future. But my name wasn't mentioned, just as I'd asked. To them, it would look like a miracle. I slipped the letter back into the pile, my heart pounding with a mix of relief and dread. They'd find it soon, and I wasn't sure how they'd react. Would they suspect me? Would they be grateful? Or would it only deepen the rift between us? I returned to the kitchen, my hands moving mechanically as I chopped vegetables for dinner, trying to anchor myself in the familiar. Emily came home first, her library badge still pinned to her sweater. She dropped her bag on the counter and started sorting through the mail, her movements tired but methodical. When she reached the lender's letter, she froze, her fingers hovering over the envelope. Greg, she called, her voice sharp with urgency. He appeared from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. What's wrong? He asked, his tone braced for bad news. She tore open the letter, her eyes scanning the page. I watched from the corner of my eye, my knife pausing over a carrot. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "The mortgage. It's been paid up. They're not foreclosing." Greg snatched the letter, his skepticism palpable. "What? How?" "We didn't," he read it again, his brow furrowing. "This says someone settled the back payments. Who the hell would do that?" Emily looked at me then, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Mom, do you know anything about this?" I shook my head, my face a mask of calm. "No idea," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Maybe the bank made a mistake. It was a weak lie, but it was all I had. Greg snorted, tossing the letter onto the counter. "Banks don't just make mistakes like this. Someone's playing games." But there was a flicker of relief in his eyes, a crack in his usual armor of frustration. That night, the house felt different, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Emily smiled at the kids during dinner. A real smile, not the strained one I'd grown used to. Greg was quieter, but his shoulders weren't as hunched, his voice less sharp. I stayed silent, letting their relief wash over me, even as I wrestled with the secret I carried. I'd given them a lifeline, but I was still on the couch, still the outsider. The next day, I went back to the bank to meet Sarah. She greeted me with a grin. "You're a miracle worker, Margaret," she said, sliding a copy of the lender's agreement across her desk. "They've accepted the modification. The house is safe, and your name's nowhere on it." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. "You don't know what this means." She leaned forward, her eyes soft. "I think I do. You're doing something extraordinary for your family. But why not tell them?" I looked down at my hands, the veins prominent under thin skin. "They don't see me anymore," I said quietly. "Not the way they used to. If they knew, it'd be charity. I want them to have this without feeling they owe me." Sarah nodded, her expression one of respect. "You're a strong woman, Margaret. Most people would want the credit." I smiled faintly. "I just want my daughter back." When I returned home, the kids were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying through the open window. I watched them from the porch, my heart aching with love and loss. Emily stepped outside, her arms crossed, her face softer than it had been in months. "Mom, we're going to be okay," she said, almost to herself. "I don't know how, but we are." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know, sweetheart. I know." That night, as I lay on the couch, I thought about the future. The mortgage was safer, but I was still here, still temporary. I'd given them breathing room, but I needed Maury a way to belong, not just exist. The seed of another idea was forming, one even bolder than the last. If I could do this, what else could I do? I closed my eyes, the creak of the couch a reminder of how far I'd come and how far I still had to go. The relief in the house was fragile, like a soap bubble waiting to pop. Emily and Greg moved through their days with a cautious optimism, their arguments quieter, their smiles more frequent. The kids sensed it too. Lily's drawings were brighter. Max's questions about moving away stopped. But I carried the weight of my secret like a stone in my pocket, heavy and ever-present. Every time Emily looked at me, I wondered if she suspected, if she saw past my carefully neutral expression to the truth beneath. I kept busy, helping with chores and the kids. But my mind was on the next step. The mortgage modification was a bandage, not a cure. Emily and Greg were still stretched thin, and I was still on the couch, my presence a quiet strain on their lives. I needed to do more, not just for them, but for me. I wasn't ready to fade into the background, to be the old woman who existed only in the margins of their story. I started researching again, this time focusing on ways to generate income. My savings were gone, poured into the mortgage, but I had skills, experience, a lifetime of grit. At the library, I used the public computers to look up freelance opportunities, editing, bookkeeping, even virtual tutoring. I'd worked as an accountant before Emily was born, balancing ledgers for a small firm. It was a skill I hadn't used in decades, but numbers had always made sense to me, their logic a comfort when life felt chaotic. I signed up for a freelance platform, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard as I built a profile. Margaret Thompson, 70, experienced bookkeeper. I typed, hesitating over the age. Would anyone hire me? But I pressed on, uploading a resume I'd painstakingly recreated from memory. Within days, I had my first client, a small business owner needing help with tax records. The pay was modest, but it was mine, earned on my terms. I worked in stolen moments, early mornings before the house woke, late nights after everyone was asleep. The couch became my office. My laptop balanced on a pillow as I typed. Each small payment felt like a victory, a step toward something bigger. I didn't know what yet, but I was building, brick by brick, a way out of the shadows. Meanwhile, Emily and Greg were adjusting to the new mortgage terms. They didn't talk about it much, but I overheard snippets, Greg mentioning a raise at work, Emily considering full-time hours at the library. The letter from the lender had sparked something in them, a belief that they could climb out of their hole. I was glad, but it stung that they didn't see me as part of that hope. One evening, as I was helping Max with his spelling homework, Emily sat down across from me, her expression serious. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. My heart thudded, but I kept my face calm, setting down the pencil. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. She hesitated, her fingers twisting together. "Greg and we're grateful you're here, but it's tight. The kids need their space, and we're thinking maybe an apartment for you would be better. We'd help with rent, of course." The words hit like a slap, though her tone was gentle. An apartment. A polite way of saying they wanted me out. I nodded, my throat tight, and forced a smile. "I understand, sweetheart. I'll start looking." She reached for my hand, her eyes soft. "It's not that we don't love you, Mom. It's just hard." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. That night, as I lay on the couch, the familiar creak of the springs felt like a taunt. I'd saved their home, and they still saw me as a problem to solve. The hurt burned, but it also fueled me. I wasn't done yet. My freelance work was picking up while more clients had hired me, and my earnings were growing. I started researching apartments, not because I wanted to leave, but because I wanted to choose my own path. A week later, I met with Sarah again, this time to discuss my own finances. "You're rebuilding," she said, her eyes bright as she reviewed my bank statements. "If you keep this up, you could qualify for a small loan, maybe enough for a down payment on a place of your own." The idea felt like a dream, too big to grasp. But I nodded, my mind racing. A place of my own. A home where I wasn't a guest. Where I could be Margaret again. Not just Grandma or the woman on the couch. I left the bank with a new goal. One that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. As I walked home, the autumn leaves crunching under my feet, I realized something. I wasn't just saving Emily's family. I was saving myself. The freelance work became my lifeline, a tether to the woman I used to be. Each new client, small businesses, a writer needing budget help, A nonprofit with tangled books was a step toward independence. I worked late into the night, the glow of my laptop casting shadows across the living room. The couch, once a symbol of my displacement, became a battlefield where I fought for my dignity. My earnings grew steadily, enough to cover small expenses and start a new savings account, one Emily and Greg knew nothing about. At home, the dynamics shifted subtly. Emily's suggestion of an apartment hung in the air, but she didn't press, and I didn't bring it up. I helped with the kids, cooked dinners, and kept the house running, all while quietly building my future. Lily and Max were my anchors, their laughter a reminder of why I stayed. "Grandma, tell us about when you were young," Lily would beg, and I'd spin stories of my life with Tom, of road trips and late-night dances in our kitchen. Their eyes lit up, and for those moments, I was more than the woman on the couch. But Greg's patience was wearing thin. One evening, as I cleared the dinner table, he cornered me in the kitchen. "Margaret, we need to figure this out," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You can't stay here forever. It's not fair to the kids." I nodded, my hands steady as I stacked plates. "I'm working on it, Greg," I said, meeting his eyes. "I won't be a burden much longer." He blinked, surprised by my tone, and muttered something before walking away. I'd never spoken to him like that, calm, but firm, with a hint of the strength I was rediscovering. It felt good, like stretching muscles I'd forgotten I had. My meetings with Sarah became weekly, each one a step toward my goal. She helped me apply for a small business loan, using my freelance income as proof of stability. "You're a force, Margaret," she said, her smile genuine. "Most people your age wouldn't take this on." "Most people my age don't have a choice," I replied, but I smiled back. The loan was approved, a modest $50. Enough for a down payment on a small condo nearby. I hadn't told anyone, not even Sarah, about my ultimate plan, to buy a place close enough to see the kids, but far enough to have my own space. I wasn't running away. I was choosing where I belonged. The condo search was daunting, each open house a reminder of how small my budget was. But I found a one-bedroom unit in a quiet complex, with a balcony overlooking a park. It wasn't fancy, but it was minor it would be. Once the paperwork went through, I signed the offer letter with trembling hands, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. This was my rebellion, my quiet triumph over the couch. At home, the tension was building. Emily and Greg were planning a budget, their voices hushed but urgent as they discussed bills. I overheard Greg mention selling the house, a desperate move to cash out while they were ahead. My stomach twisted. I'd saved their home once, but I couldn't keep doing it. They needed to stand on their own, just as I was learning to do. One night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she hugged me tightly. "Grandma, are you leaving?" she asked, her voice small. I brushed her hair back, my heart aching. "Not far, sweetheart," I said. "I'll always be here for you." She nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep, and I kissed her forehead. As I left her room, I saw Emily watching from the hallway, her expression unreadable. "You're good with them," she said softly. "I don't say that enough." I smiled, the warmth of her words tempered by the distance between us. "They're easy to love," I said, and turned away before she could see the tears in my eyes. The next day, I finalized the condo purchase. The loan covered the down payment, and my freelance income would handle the monthly mortgage. It was tight, but I'd managed on less before. As I signed the last document, Sarah handed me the keys, her eyes shining. "You did this, Margaret," she said. You're unstoppable. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. Not quite, I said, but I felt a spark of who I'd been, reignited. I was ready to tell Emily, to step out of the shadows and into my own life. But first, I had one more thing to do, a final act to bridge the gap between us. The condo keys were a secret weight in my pocket, a promise of freedom I hadn't yet shared. I'd planned to tell Emily after dinner, when the kids were in bed and the house was quiet. But life, as always, had other plans. That afternoon, Greg came home early, his face stormy as he dropped a stack of papers on the kitchen counter. Another letter from the bank, he said, his voice tight. They're saying the mortgage was modified because someone paid the arrears. Emily, do you know anything about this? Emily looked up from her laptop, her brow furrowed. No. I told you. I don't. Maybe it was a relative. Or a mistake. Her eyes flicked to me, and I kept my gaze on the table, my heart pounding. Greg's frustration boiled over. This isn't a game. Margaret, if you know something, say it. We can't keep living like this, with secrets and handouts. The room went still, the air thick with tension. I took a deep breath, my hands steady despite the storm inside. It was me, I said quietly. I paid the arrears. Emily's mouth fell open, and Greg froze, his eyes narrowing. You, he said, disbelief dripping from the word. With what money? My savings, I said, meeting his gaze. I've been saving for years, and I used it to stop the foreclosure. I didn't want you to lose the house. Emily's hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide. Mom, why didn't you tell us? That was your money, your security, because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me. I interrupted, my voice firm. I wanted to help, not be a burden. I know I've been in the way here, but I love you, Emily. I love the kids. I couldn't let you lose this. Greg's face softened, just a fraction, but he didn't speak. Emily crossed the room and hugged me, her arms tight around my shoulders. Mom, I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know. I didn't see you. I hugged her back, tears stinging my eyes. It's okay, I said, though it wasn't. Not entirely. I just wanted you to be okay. We sat down, the three of us, and I told them everything: the bank visits, Sarah's help, the freelance work. I left out the condo, saving that for later. Greg listened, his usual bluster gone, replaced by something like respect. You did all that for us? He asked, his voice low. For all of us, I corrected. You're my family. That night, the house felt different, not just lighter, but warmer, like a home again. Emily insisted I take the guest room, moving the kids' toys to make space. No more couch, she said, her eyes fierce. I nodded, too overwhelmed to argue. The next day, I told them about the condo. Emily's face fell, but I held up a hand. It's not far, I said. I'll be here for the kids. For you. But I need my own space, too. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I get it, Mom. I wish I'd seen you sooner. Greg, to my surprise, offered to help me move. You're tougher than I gave you credit for, he said, a grudging smile on his face. I'm sorry I was harsh. I smiled back, the weight of the past months lifting. We're okay, Greg. We're family. The move was quick: a few boxes, some secondhand furniture, and the kids' drawings taped to my new walls. The condo was small, but it was mine, filled with light and the promise of new beginnings. I invited Emily and the kids over for dinner that first week. The table set with my old china. Lily and Max ran around the balcony, their laughter echoing, while Emily helped me in the kitchen. "You're happy here," she said, chopping tomatoes. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said, stirring the sauce. "But I'm happier knowing you're okay." She hugged me again, and this time, it felt like the old days when she was my little girl, and I was her world. We weren't there yet, but we were close. The condo became my sanctuary, a space where I could breathe without feeling like an intruder. The balcony overlooked a small park, where I'd sit with my morning coffee, watching kids play and dogs chase squirrels. My freelance work grew steadily, more clients, more projects, enough to cover my mortgage and even save a little. I wasn't rich, but I was free, and that was worth more than I could have imagined. Emily and I found a new rhythm. She'd bring the kids over on weekends, their energy filling my small home with life. We'd bake cookies, play board games, or just sit on the balcony, talking about nothing and everything. Max liked to draw on my fridge, his crayons leaving bright smudges I never wiped away. Lily would curl up next to me, asking for stories about her grandpa, about the life I'd lived before I was grandma. Each visit felt like a stitch, mending the gap that had grown between us. Greg, too, was different. He'd stop by to fix a leaky faucet or bring takeout when Emily was working late. "You've got a good setup here, Margaret," he said one evening, surveying my living room with a nod. "I underestimated you." I laughed, handing him a beer. Most people do. The truth about the mortgage had changed something in him, softened the edges of his frustration. He wasn't perfect, none of us were, but he was trying. And that was enough. We'd sit together sometimes, watching the kids play, and talk about small things, his job, the kids' school, the future. It wasn't the closeness I had with Emily, but it was a start. One evening, Emily came over alone, her face serious. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, sitting across from me at my tiny dining table. "I want to pay you back. For the mortgage. For everything." I shook my head, my heart full. "You don't owe me, Emily. I did it because I love you, because I wanted to see you happy." She reached for my hand, her eyes shining. "I know, but I want to do this for me, for us. I'm going back to school, Mom. Library science. I want a better job, a better life for the kids. And I want you to know I see you now." I squeezed her hand, tears blurring my vision. "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it. She was my daughter, but she was also her own woman, finding her way just as I had. The months passed, and the condo became a hub for our family. Thanksgiving was held at my place, the table crowded with mismatched chairs and laughter. Greg carved the turkey. Lily and Max argued over the last roll, and Emily raised a glass to me, her smile radiant. "To Mom," she said, "who never gave up on us." I raised my glass, my heart swelling. "To family," I said, and we drank, the clink of glasses a promise of better days. I still worked, my laptop humming late into the night. But it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about purpose, about proving to myself and maybe to the world that age didn't define me. I started volunteering at the library, helping with their senior programs, sharing my story with others who felt invisible. I wasn't just Margaret, the woman who'd saved her daughter's house. I was Margaret, who'd saved herself. One spring morning, as I sat on my balcony, Lily and Max ran up with a surprise drawing of our family. All of us together, smiling under a bright sun. "This is us," Lily said, pointing to the figures. You're the biggest. Grandma. Because you're the strongest. I hugged them both, my heart full to bursting. The couch was a distant memory. A chapter closed. I'd found my place. Not just in their home, but in their lives and in my own. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. For them. For me. For the family we'd rebuilt. One quiet triumph at a time.